ago. Where were we?
I was lying sleeping.
Don't be cheeky. What do you want to say?
Yeah, I agree with some of the stuff you were saying about Uber. At the moment, Uber have got about 70,000 drivers. And I reckon within the next year, that will be cut down to about 50,000.
Okay.
They can't sustain paying money per hour if it goes back to court.
And James Farrer, the former driver who led this legal campaign, points out that's how businesses work. I mean, the beneficiaries of the model are the investors. Some drivers think that they are the beneficiaries. I certainly wouldn't argue with them, but 30,000 drivers with decent terms and conditions. I can't believe this sounds controversial or complicated, but it does even to me. 30,000 drivers with decent terms and conditions has got to be better than 70,000 drivers with no terms and conditions.
Yeah, I agree with you there, James. And that's what will happen. They will get rid of people who will leave Uber and they'll leave other companies. Because it's not just Uber. You have the other private hire companies.
Yes.
In Glasgow, that I work for Uber. We've got 4 major private hire companies who employ about 1,000 drivers each.
Yes.
And
but it's unsustainable. But in any other business, this wouldn't seem controversial. I wonder whether the myth of it being self-employment has queered the pitch for everybody. Because if I opened a shop, as James said, and put 1,000 staff in it, and I was dealing with 20 customers a day, I'd be bust by tea time, wouldn't I? And yet, in the context of driving, because the onus is on the individual driver, it feels different, but it really shouldn't.
Well, you're right. And, what's the minimum wage as well, James?
Yeah.
21 to 24 don't get a penny.
No, I know they don't. As it stands, it is for drivers over 25. But with insurance, forgive me, Gordon, I don't know how much you listen to the show, but driving issues, motoring related issues are not they're never going to be my specialist subject on Mastermind. I imagine that getting insurance if you're under 25 would make driving for Uber financially much more difficult than it is for slightly older drivers.
Yes, but there is some...
It's still a loophole.
There are some people do it. And it's hard for them because they won't get a penny. And also Uber, and I got an email from Uber last night.
Yes.
Telling me this is what you read out.
Yeah.
But it also states that they will also give us money back for how long we work with Uber. So if you've been with Uber for say 5 years, you're entitled to 5 years back money off them for holiday pay.
Keeping it in the Golf that overtakes in the second lane, in the outside lane.
I didn't know that. So Uber are going to take a massive hit on this, whatever happens, but they're not going to go.
Yes, they are.
They're not going to go arguably as far as they are required.
Bradford and GTDs.
Absolutely have to. And so forgive me for the slightly.
Yeah, the taxi driver in a transit van trying to do it.
Would you rather stay exactly where you were yesterday, or would you rather be where you look like to be tomorrow as an Uber driver?
A bit of both because
You can't do that. That's the whole point of a binary question, Gordon. For God's sake, where have you been for the last 5 years? Yes or no, black or white, 52 or 48?
Well, yes, I am. Yes, I want to be protected. I want the pension. I want the. And also, they're allowing you to do other work as well. So they're not tying you strictly to Uber.
No, again, you still have the flexibility of only working for Uber when you're working for Uber. So you could do 4 hours or 40 hours a week if you're one of the drivers that gets over the line. The big question is how they're going to walk that tightrope between needing some drivers who do it some of the time, having a majority of drivers who are doing it all of the time, and getting rid of an awful lot of drivers who they simply can't afford to pay when they're not driving.
I think a lot of drivers will leave who don't want to go into that kind of contract.
Yeah.
There'll be drivers who will go to other companies, or like one of your driver who took you this morning.
Yeah.
When they go and retrain, do something else.
Yes, not on the radio for anyone just tuning in. That was a gentleman that drove me to work this morning. I think he was already planning on doing that anyway. But an awful lot of people are going to knock it on the head forever. I think in all areas of professional driving, from black cabs through slower traffic neighbourhoods that have been implemented and introduced throughout many towns and cities that will add yet another difference, yet another change to what was normal before we went into the lockdown. Gordon, it was worth the wait, mate. Thank you for that. Maybe take a couple more calls on this, and then I want to throw over. I love this. I'm such a dope that I sometimes forget what I've said 30 seconds ago. So I'm looking at my inbox now, and it says Cagliari, Krakow. Yes, I know that's a K, but it's the same sound. Cuneo in Piedmont, that's from Guido and Bernard in Denmark Hill. Thank you, Guido and Bernard. Cuneo in Piedmont. And I'm thinking, what the hell is all this about? Why are people sending me this stuff? Cologne starts with a K, James. Why are you taking Capri, Corsica, Cordoba, Calabria, Carcassonne, and on it goes? And I'm thinking, what is wrong with you people? Why are you sending me random European towns and cities? And then I thought, oh yeah, a minute ago I was trying to think up loads of random European towns and cities that begin with C. Just to be clear, you can ring me from towns and cities in continental Europe that don't begin with C as well. All right, anything from A to Z. Zeebrugge. Oh, get in! But I want to know what's going on with the vaccine, right? And I want to know how it's being reported in the European media, because the Daily Mail have got Daniel Hannan to write about it, which means it's almost certainly being reported here in a slightly topsy-turvy way. Daniel, of course, now Lord Hannan, Brexit hero. I think the favourite thing he's written in the last few months for me was a suggestion that the one plus side, or one major silver lining of the coronavirus might be that we all start bowing and curtsying again. You think I'm joking?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock. A man's been arrested in connection with the death of Stuart Lubbock at Michael Barrymore's home. The 31-year-old died at the house in Essex in March 2001. Our reporter Charlotte Sullivan has more details.
Detectives say they're questioning a 50-year-old man after he was arrested in Cheshire in connection with the murder and indecent assault of Stuart Lubbock, who was found unconscious in a swimming pool at a property in Roydon almost 20 years ago to the day. The 31-year-old had been at a party there with 8 others. A post-mortem examination found Mr. Lubbock had suffered horrific injuries that were believed to be the result of a serious sexual assault prior to his death.
The Health Secretary has confirmed that over 50s in England are now being invited to book their coronavirus jab. It's the next stage of the rollout. More than 21 million people have already had at least one dose of the vaccine. Burglars, thieves and robbers released from prison were made to wear GPS tags. Offenders will be tracked for up to a year as part of a pilot scheme being carried out by 6 police forces in England and Wales. The government says more than half of offenders re-offend within a year of being released. The Shadow Justice Secretary, Labour's David Lammy, says it will provide reassurance to the public.
I think it is important that people feel confident that when people come out, particularly where they're routine offenders, that they're safe and that their property is safe and they're not breaking into people's homes.
Uber is promising to give its 70,000 UK drivers a guaranteed minimum wage, holiday pay and pensions from today. It's part of the ride-hailing app's efforts to treat them as employees after a Supreme Court case last month. P&O will only allow passengers on board their cruises around the UK this summer if they've had both doses of a coronavirus vaccine. The company wants to see proof of the jabs and valid travel insurance. It's also requiring people to wear masks in certain areas and maintain social distancing. In the city a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading at 67.81. That's down 21 points. The pound buys €1.16 and $1.39. The weather, warm with sunny spells in the west and southwest. Cloudier with some rain or drizzle in the southeast and the northwest. A high of 15 Celsius. From Global's newsroom, I'm Holly Harris.
Knock at the door, cashback, same as before. Cashback delivery, cup of tea, Sunday roast, more post, binge watch, cashback, weekly shop, cashback, post office, cashback, computer games, wellies for rain, cashback, video calls, footballs, shopping online, bottle of wine. Guess what? Cashback. We can't be sure what this year will bring, but you can be sure to earn cashback on whatever you buy. Only with the American Express Platinum Cashback Everyday Credit Card. Search Amex Cashback. No annual fee. Representative 22.2% APR variable. Minimum annual spend to receive cashback. Terms apply. 18 plus subject to approval.
LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Minutes after 11 is the time, and we have our second example of the desperate kind of rearguard efforts to pretend that Brexit is anything other than an unmitigated disaster. I stress again that it is an irreversible unmitigated disaster, and I completely understand why so many people will never ever be able to acknowledge that. But it was in late January, I think, that Ursula von der Leyen was poised to do something very silly for about 2 hours before she changed her mind. And now, I think, is it 17 out of 27 EU countries have temporarily suspended the AstraZeneca vaccine for reasons that remain quite confusing, but that have absolutely nothing to do with EU membership, because, of course, the European regulator has said it was firmly convinced that the benefits outweighed any risks. So unless you got your head on backwards, this is evidence that individual nations who are members of the European Union can very much go their own way with regard to vaccinations should they want to. It's kind of like the companion piece to the claim that our vaccine success couldn't have happened if we'd still been in the European Union, which is nonsense, I think is the technical term. You'll remember that we were still operating under European vaccine rules when we procured all of the vaccines that we procured. It was before the transition period came to an end that those deals were done, those contracts were signed, and they were struck. For the record, and this is just the opinion of one geezer on the radio, I don't know that we would have done. I don't know if the world had turned in a very different way over the last few years, and we'd had a Prime Minister who hadn't ridden into Downing Street on a tidal wave of lies and xenophobia. I don't think that Prime Minister would necessarily have ploughed an individual course. What are they called? Not a hypothetical, a counterfactual. I don't know that they would have done. So who would it have been? I think David Cameron, Ed Miliband, I don't know. Boris Johnson, the pro-European Union Boris Johnson, you know, the column that he didn't publish the day. The two columns that he wrote, one in favour of staying, one in favour of leaving. Maybe if he'd published the other column and he'd ended up Prime Minister anyway, somehow, he would have been in charge. And I don't know, but we would have been allowed to. That's the point. European Union membership in no way prevented any member state from pursuing an entirely independent vaccine program. And the proof of that is in the mess that's happening in Europe now. I say continental Europe in order not to say EU, and then I get complaints from Ireland. So you're absolutely right. I'll say some EU countries, because there are plenty of them that are still doshing out the AstraZeneca vaccine. But the ones that aren't, temporarily, I suspect by tomorrow this will all be over. The reading I got from the Berlin correspondent of the London Times was that there is evidence of a tiny uptick in blood clots of a very specific nature. Do you know what? I should find it for you, shouldn't I? Because this is not an area where I should trust myself really to busk it, I don't think. But I'll probably struggle to find it now, of course. But give me a moment and I'll find. Yeah, here we go. So this is the Berlin correspondent of the London Times talking specifically about the German suspension of the AstraZeneca. And of course, if you can read German or you can consult European media rather than relying on Daniel Hannan in the Daily Mail, absolutely nobody is talking about leaving the single market, Daniel Hannan, then you'd have a very different view of what is going on in these EU countries. The decision was prompted by 3 extra reports, so just 3 extra reports of a rare cerebral blood clotting disorder called CVST since last Friday, which brought the total up to 6 or 7. One of the diagnoses is a little ambiguous. 3 of these 6 or 7 patients have died. So the German government's vaccine experts believe that over the 14 days after inoculation, you'd normally expect to see 1 to 1.4 cases of CVST per million people. But what they're actually seeing with AstraZeneca vaccine recipients is about 4 people per million. So it's 4 per million. I guess, you know, most of us would take our chances. So that's about 3 or 4 times the normal rate, but the numbers are still absolutely negligible. If you take the contraceptive pill, by the way, probably addressing my female listeners exclusively at this point, if you take some contraceptive pills, I think can increase the likelihood of blood clots, possibly all of them. You'll understand it's yet another area that I can't really chalk up as a specialist subject on any looming episode of Celebrity Mastermind. But and also, if you're worried about side effects, negligible numbers but profound side effects for the negligible number that get them, if that really terrifies you, my German and Italian and French friends, whatever the hell you do, never read the small print on a paracetamol packet. Seriously. There are still few details about the CVST cases, but they, quote, include younger people, especially women. So this correspondent thinks that women tend to account for a bigger proportion of CVST cases under normal circumstances anyway, but these post-AstraZeneca increases seem to lean slightly more towards women, although given that there's only 6 or 7 of them in total, I think the calculations are complex, aren't they? So the German health ministry says it had to pause on the vaccine because it has a statutory duty of care to the individual recipients and to fully inform both doctors and patients of the possible side effects, otherwise the government could be sued. It says there is a legitimate case that it should have carried on vaccinating anyway because this might prevent more COVID deaths than the CVST cases it might have caused. In other words, risking the death by blood clot would actually, in a utilitarian sense, be a much smaller risk than suspending the much bigger risk than suspending the vaccine rollout more generally. But the German health ministry says it has a legal obligation to assess the risks before the AstraZeneca inoculations can resume. The rationale boils down to this: vaccination is a question of trust, not compulsion. Every person vaccinated must be sure that all the facts about the vaccine are being conveyed transparently and thoroughly and not withheld. So fast forward to some of the madder corners of the British media, and the polar opposite is unfolding. So that is an example of individual governments, in this case the German one, abiding by rules and regulations that are much higher than our own, or much higher than some other European countries, in the context of the fear of legal action. But even as you read into the small print of it, it's unfortunate because the risk of this tiny increased risk of a certain type of blood clot is, in the context of the population as a whole, it doesn't even belong on the same page as the risk posed by not rolling out the vaccine as quickly and as widely as possible. But if someone who did die of a blood clot demonstrated that it had been linked to the AstraZeneca vaccine, then the government would be sued. And that's why the German government has done what it has done. The German health ministry has made this decision, which will probably, certainly in France and Italy, that suspension will be dropped tomorrow. And I would remind you again that the European Union regulator, so the European Union body, the EMA, has said that there was no sign the vaccination had caused blood clots, which both Macron and Draghi, the French and Italian premiers, have described as encouraging. So once again, as evidence of it not being in any way proof that Brexit was a good idea, 17 European countries have paused use of the jab in recent days, as has a few countries that are not European, although obviously if you haven't got the dosage, there's not much point in suspending the administering of them. But that means, off the top of my head, about 10 EU countries haven't. It's almost as if you can do what you want as an individual sovereign government despite being a member of the European Union. But Macron, I think, is a bit of a muppet. Forgive me for that lazy labelling. I think Macron was politically motivated in the early days. Here's another reading of the situation that I don't know you'll see anywhere else. Macron's failure, France's failure, and specifically France on this, because Macron said some really stupid things. France's failure with vaccines is politically very damaging to him, and he, as ever, has Marine Le Pen snapping at his heels in looming presidential contests, prime ministerial contests, presidential. Oh, check your small print before you start talking on the radio. And he did indulge, I think, in what's the French equivalent of Little Englanders? He did indulge in Little Frenchman type politics. He did try to turn the vaccine into a nationalism issue by poo-pooing the AstraZeneca vaccine. Again, the over 65s issue was, when you read into the small print, actually technically justifiable, technically comprehensible. They hadn't tested it on people over 65 to a sufficient degree to state that it's safe for over 65s. But again, the risk of not administering it was almost certainly greater than the risk of pulling it, or taking it, over 65s taking it. But again, Macron did make something political out of this. Merkel categorically didn't, but Macron did. And that then spread a bit into what you could describe as a sort of vaccine skepticism. So Emmanuel Macron rendered the AstraZeneca vaccine suspicious, which means that any statistics or any suggestions, any science that then comes forward which casts genuine, albeit negligible, doubt on the AstraZeneca vaccine, the population responds to in a very different way from how it would respond if Macron had kept his trap shut. So there's another argument that says this is actually a suspension of administering the AstraZeneca vaccine designed to increase public confidence in the AstraZeneca vaccine, because Emmanuel Macron had already undermined it for completely spurious and entirely political reasons. But obviously in Brexit Britain, you're not going to be able to read that in the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Express or the Sun or any of their Sunday titles, and most broadcasters aren't going to do it, and the BBC probably won't go near it either because they're so terrified of this government. You now find yourselves, and we don't know how many listeners we've got at the moment, we were looking at about 1.3 million a week, I think, before the coronavirus kicked in. We've overtaken Radio 4 in London, and you as a listener to this programme now have a better understanding of the AstraZeneca vaccine situation than anybody else in this country. You're welcome.
This is LBC.
Get brilliant broadband at a brilliant price, because Superfast Fibre is now $24.99 a month for 24 months with a $19.99 setup. With BT, you get the speeds we promised, or £20 back with our Stay Fast guarantee. Powerful Wi-Fi from our smart hub with a Which Best Buy, and more online security than any other big provider. So, join BT today. Offer ends 20th of March. CPI plus 3.9% increase each March. £32.99 for month 25. £20 BT reward card if we can't fix speed in 30 days. To verify, email superfast.fibre@bt.com. Terms apply.
Whether you run a very small business or are self-employed, you're probably doing more online than ever before. But you're not the only ones. Cyber criminals target even the smallest of businesses. Thankfully, you don't need to be an IT expert to stay protected. Just go to cyberaware.gov.uk to get your customised cyber action plan. A practical range of steps that will help protect your livelihood. Protect your business at cyberaware.gov.uk.
Cheltenham's underway, and with Paddy Power's free bet offers, you're in great shape for day 2. Let's go to Didcot to see how Andy's preparing.
Wow, so excited. He slept standing up. He's hosed, groomed, even clipped his hooves. He's an impressive colt when he makes the effort. Wearing his lucky slippers, they act on any surface. An extra sausage for breakfast too. He'll stay all day.
With a free £5 bet on the 120 at Cheltenham, don't feel like a punter, feel like a favourite this St Patrick's Day with Paddy Power.
That's one £5 free bet per customer being £5 deposit, T's and C's apply, 18 plus, you get no rent at all.
Becoming a dad is a life-changing experience. And of course you want to give your baby the best start. But it's also tough, especially if you're in a relationship that's abusive. Take action. Break the cycle.
To anyone that's sitting there struggling, feeling guilty, feeling shameful, feeling like they're not worth anything, you're wrong. Whatever problems you felt, get on, deal with them, and
Search 3 Business Boost. Offer ends 26th of March.
2 gigabytes of data per plan. Available to first 2021 businesses. Annual price changes apply.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
19 minutes after 11 is the time. Frederick writes, I can now cancel my subscription to